welcome to the show kind of thing?
That's going to be it. I normally start, so I don't have a welcome to the show. Also because I don't like thinking of this as a show. So I have always just started with the person's name. So I would just be like, Peter Young, welcome. And that's how it's been.
Scene one, take one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how it's been, because I'm doing my best to fight the like trend of everyone who has a podcast and tries to make it real podcasty with welcome back to this. Thanks for tuning in. Mostly because I have a deep need to be different.
That's the four in you.
Yeah. And so I try to make it special and unique, but also I really do have a heart for this to not be like a production for me where I'm putting this thing together and I want everyone to come tune in every week to hear from me and one of my new guests. I really want this to be something that I know and value people's wisdom, and I know they have things to share. I know God's taught them things, or they are just insightful and fruitful people that I want to kind of capture what God's taught them and make it available for people. And so I'm starting with the people who have done that for me in my life, which is why you're here, and which is why there'll be a lot of people from my campus ministry who I want to sit down with, because those years in college, being a part of that campus ministry, by far the most formative years for me as an adult in my Christian walk. Not to kind of trivialize middle school and high school or even my parents, but I think as an adult, what does it mean to walk with Jesus and know Jesus? I had a whole new experience through college. And so that being said, welcome to the Wait What podcast, Peter Young. I met you at that campus ministry. And so I would like you to tell me a little bit about what it is that you do. Like, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm a campus pastor with the Fellowship of Christian University Students, specifically at the University of Texas at Dallas campus.
Okay, Fellowship of Christian University Students.
Which is Focus.
Focus, gotcha.
Yeah, and UTD. So Focus at UTD. I'm finishing up year 10 as a full-time campus pastor there. I did go to UTD as a student. We overlapped 1 year, my senior year and your freshman year. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I remember you, because you were gone for half of the semester, weren't you?
Yeah, I was gone for the fall semester working in DC for a nonprofit organization.
Right, because I remember it was like spring semester, and all of a sudden this dude came back who like everyone knew, and he was like starting to lead again, and he drove this silver convertible and wanted to hang out with me and get to know me. And I was like, who is this guy? And why did he show up in the middle? Like, I was feeling like I'm just getting kind of a reputation in the ministry. Like I'm getting some, making some progress, and then this guy comes in and everyone loves him and everyone knows him, and then he's trying to hang out with me. And so that's when I met you. And then we subsequently, in the following years, we led a small group together. We led worship together. And you have become one of my closest friends, both actually and spiritually. So that's why you're sitting here, because you have been such an important person to me. Why did you say yes to doing this?
This podcast thing?
Yeah.
Why not? I think when I first went to college, actually, I had this philosophy of say yes to everything, which obviously isn't say yes to everything,
right?
But say yes to as many things as possible, even things that I may not think I would enjoy, or things that a lot of it was midnight Whataburger runs with my roommate. But it's just oh, you want to go on this trip? Sure. It sounds like a lot of work, but sure. You want to go camping? I don't really love camping, but yes. So, I think I've tried to take that throughout most of my life, to just, ignore what I might think is inconvenient or what I might not like, and just say yes.
I think that's one of my favorite things about you. It's also one of the most annoying things about you as someone who partners with you in ministry sometimes, because it's like, oh, Peter said yes to this thing. Oh, we got to go do this thing. And it's like 9:30 at night and people want to go see a movie. Like, we're going because we were invited. But looking back on it, like that's the faithfulness of Jesus in you to say, I'm going to serve the people around me by saying yes to them because, and you taught me this lesson more than anyone else, and I've talked about this previously, but the idea of you can experience Jesus in a real way just by being in community with other people. I remember when you would ask to hang out, and I knew that you were a leader in our campus ministry, I just assumed, oh, that's the like leader. He wants to hang out with me. I've been in ministry my whole life. That means that he wants to sit down and talk about my faith and like go through some curriculum and whatever. And so every time you would come to like pick me up from my apartment and we would go do something, I would always just be expecting this, like, okay, so like, how's your walk? Or how are things with Jesus? And what are you wrestling with? Or, hey, here's a devotional I want us to go through. And time after time, you would like pick me up. We would go do something. We would go run errands, or we would just go hang out. And then you would be like, okay, I gotta go. You drop me off, and then that would be it. And I would be like,
and you're like disappointed.
I was like, oh, I've just been kind of waiting this whole time, ready to like talk about, like present the good Christian version of myself so that I can impress my leader. And then it was like, oh no, that was it. Like we were just spending time together. And that was so wild to me at 18, 19 years old to know that like, oh, I can love people like Jesus does by just walking with them, saying yes to the things that they're doing and being alongside them, rather than always explicitly having to be articulate about faith specifically as a part of the conversation. And you taught me that. And so I think that's incredible. I didn't mention this, but thanks for hosting this. We are in your beautiful new house. Your brand new baby, not brand new, your son is asleep, so we find some time to get to do this. So thanks for being flexible.
Of course.
Speaking of young William, why did you name him William? And I want to know, because I think this is it, and even if you tell me it's not why, I will believe this. It's because someday you want him to be able to joust like a Knight's Tale where he screams, and that's your favorite movie, and that's the reason you named him William.
Actually, I mean, my wife suggested we have his middle name be Thatcher.
Oh my God.
After that movie.
Yes.
Because she knows how much I love it. But I mean, was it a small factor? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But no, my dad, his English alias, his American name, so not his legal name, but his American name is William. And then my wife's dad's name is William, even though he goes by his middle name, Mark. And so both of our dad's names are William. Neither of them really go by William.
Right.
And so it was just kind of the perfect like way to honor them. But also there's not a whole lot of confusion. So, it's that perfect spot.
Yeah, it's like the inverse of a lot of people where they will put their dad's name as the middle name. So that way you like continue it. Like my brother's name is Jonathan, which is my dad's name. My middle name is Richard, which is my grandpa's name. So like it's kind of the inverse of that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
When I told my dad that we named our son William, I think my whole family was kind of confused because it's not really an Asian thing to like name your kids the same name as someone in your family.
Wow.
So
was that like an honoring thing or just like a weird thing?
I think it was a weird thing to them, but I'm like, I don't care. Like I'm going to honor you.
Sure.
Like, and one day, hopefully, I think you'll get it.
Yeah.
I think they do.
For sure. So yes, thank you for hosting this. You have a beautiful home. And thank you to Emily, your lovely wife, who I love also. And hopefully we don't wake up your baby, but I want to get into kind of the thesis, that kind of premise of this, which is the idea of wait, what? Which for me really means, what are the moments in your life where you've been presented with something that made you stop and reconsider? And your response to that was, wait, what? Like, that's true? Or that's what people think? Or that's why that is? I think those moments are the most transformational for us. I think people point back to their life and they identify why they are the way that they are by those moments and not necessarily like general philosophies or schools of thought. So kind of looking back at your life, or just kind of why you are the way that you are there wait what moments for you that really stand out as foundational in your story?
Yeah, I think there's two big ones. I think when I was a lot younger, a lot earlier in my pastoral career, there was just like a pretty big moral failing on my part. Just some like crossed boundaries with an ex-girlfriend, and after I read this book Inside Out by Dr. Larry Crabb, which I always say, like, in terms of influence, like there's the Bible at the top, and like right under it is that book Inside Out. So I recommend it to a lot of people because it really just like gets at the heart of like, why do I keep sinning even if I've, chosen to follow God? Like, why, like, do I really have the Spirit? What does this mean? Like, it seems like the Bible says, like, you put on this new clothing, you put on a new self, and yet sometimes I feel very much like my old self. And so the book really goes into that, and just like it convicted me. And so I came forward with what I had done, what I was kind of still in the midst of. And it was a moment of like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I'm not in control, but I have to do this. And it was tough. And there was a lot of meetings. I definitely thought like 100% I'm going to get fired, but maybe I can still stick around this community. And I think that's my only shot at, really experiencing God and Him changing my heart. There was a lot of meetings, a lot of plans, a lot of like decisions to help kind of help me recover and redeem the situation, multi-year kind of plan. And I didn't lose my job. I didn't have to stop being a junior pastor. And so, they let me stay. I had to change a lot about my life. And it really, it changed the whole trajectory of being a very private, hidden person to like, no, I'm going to be open. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to be in this position ever again. Like God has to change me from this because I don't ever want to be here again. And so I was met with a lot of grace, a lot of love. And I think that really started me changing my view of God. So that was the first, that was big point. And then the second one, which I didn't even know this was called the Wait What podcast or Wait What show.
I'm so glad you read my text.
But I mean, literally, the most recent one, I'm like 28. I'm in my last year of seminary. I'm taking this class on Martin Luther and the theology of grace. Okay. And I took this class because I was like, oh, I'm interested in Martin Luther, right? Grace, everybody knows about it. Like easy. Like you don't need to take a class on grace. You need to take a class on Martin Luther. So I take this from, and the professor is Dr. Daniel Lee. And so I take this class, and throughout the whole thing, like I remember there was this one point where he's like, God loves you so much. I'm like, yeah. It's like, and if you never did a good thing for the rest of your life, He would still love you just as much. And I'm like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Like that's not true. Like if I never did another good thing, like how would we do good things unless there was some like carrot, right? Some of God's love at the end of that good thing.
Right.
But he's like, no, this is the gospel. And like week after week, he would just kind of beat that drum in a different way, in a different phrase of like, no, God loves you. Like, even if you still sin, even if you are just going through the motions, like the gospel is not, the gospel is not a task list. The gospel is not something that you you have to share with people or else you're not doing it right. It's like, no, the gospel is transformative because God just loves you. And I had to sit with that throughout the whole class. And by the end of it, I was like, all right. At first, I was like, no way, not a chance. By the end, I'm like, maybe. Like, that would be really good if it was true. And I just had to sit with it for a year, talking to people about it, preaching about it, even though I wasn't entirely sure. And then as I tried to piece back together my theology, I was like, wait, this is true. Like, this is the gospel that I've heard my entire life and just now got. And I'm like, this is life transformational. Anyways, that was, yeah. I'm like, grew up in church. Took me until almost 3 decades. Where I was like, oh, I get it. This is the gospel. This is why it's good news. This is not like just news that I need to convince myself is good. Like, this is actually good news. And it's what I want to tell everybody. I don't have to force myself to tell people. Like, I want to tell people, like, God loves you. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, it doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't matter what you do. He loves you. What do you think?
I remember because we invited Dr. Lee to come speak at the winter retreat 2 years ago, I think. And I was coming back to just hang out as an alumni. And I remember you telling me, you're like, oh yeah, we invited this guy. Like, I brought him. I convinced everyone that he needs to be the speaker for this weekend. And I remember when you told me, you're like, I realized I didn't understand God's grace until I took this class. And I was like, okay, like, I get it. You're dramatic, you're emotional, whatever. And first sermon, dude, I just writing. And I'm like, what? No, this. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't know how to talk about this as well as I should. Like, one of the things that's so hard, especially as an adult, talking to non-believers about the gospel, is for them to understand why it would matter to them. Like, the idea of God loving you, like, what does that really mean? Like, how does that help me? How does that make life better? Because it's a really kind of ethereal concept, because God's not handing out tangible gifts in the way that your company might. Right? Or the way that a relationship might, where, oh, I want to make more money. So if my company likes me, they might give me more stuff. Or I want to be the best at my job. And so I'm going to do everything I can to get more of it. Or this person I'm attracted to and they make me feel special. And so I'm going to pursue, give them my time, give them my energy, and hopefully they'll give me their attention and affection or some level of intimacy. And it's like, okay, God loves you. So what? What does that mean? And I've wrestled with that for so much of my life of like, hey, if I'm going to be an effective like minister, an effective like disciple, I should be able to answer that question. And I remember sitting in that sermon being like, oh, so God's love is not just this like kind of ethereal concept that I'm just supposed to like hope when I think about it makes me feel better. Yeah. Even though I think that's what I thought. It's like, oh no, God's love is actually a visceral, emotional experience once you understand, 1, your sin, and 2, what he gave up for you in history, not in storytelling kind of conceptual sacrifice. Like, what Jesus did is in history. It's verifiable in history, not just through the Bible, but through multiple sources. And the resurrection is as verifiable as any other truth in history, which means what he talked about on earth as a human is all compelling and true because he proved it through his death and resurrection. That's so much more real. And then if God's real, then God loving you is real. And so it took me just like kind of understanding that in a really kind of small scale way within just that one message that Friday night, where I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And so, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And also, I think to your first story, that first moment, that's a huge part of my testimony, which is I've lived in I've grown up and been in leadership ministry most of my life, in middle and high school, and even in college, starting to lead small groups. But then I have this deep sin, this deep kind of ingrained desire to fulfill my own preferences. And it's apart from Jesus, and I'm wanting to do both of them. And ultimately, because God's a good and loving God, he brings your sin to the light, because that's the only way you heal. And I remember, because you were there, the end of the junior year going into senior year of college, I finally got to go to the leadership kind of retreat up in Washington State. And through a worship service and through the Holy Spirit just being like, you got to let this out. I was like, I got to go tell people about what I'm up to, about who I'm engaged with, what I'm involved with, what I've been hiding from people. And so I went to 4 of the men in my life who have been like the spiritual leaders and mentors. And I said, hey, here's what I'm doing. And I remember the fear of like, oh, I'm going to lose everything. And it's going to be so embarrassing, and it's going to be so shameful, because I'm going to go from being on stage almost every Friday night in large group to being put in the like, hey, you're so bad and your sin is so great that you can't ever speak to anybody about Jesus again because you're a hypocrite. And I remember that fear of like, I don't know what's going to happen. And then I told person after person, and they were like, thank you so much for telling us. Because one of the axioms of focus is, if you mess up, tell me. If you mess up big, tell me faster, or some version of that.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, oh, that's why. Because God's response is finally. Because now we can address it. We can start the healing process. We can do the things that are needed for redemption and reconciliation. And it was, yeah, okay. Like, this isn't oh, no worries, you're forgiven. It's hey, now like, here's some boundaries, here's some plans, here's the next year of your life, what it's going to be like. You're going to live in a house with 5 other men. You're going to have access to no women and really nothing else besides these guys and this community. And we're going to reevaluate what you think about, what you watch, how you live. So it wasn't just like, oh, no consequence, because that's not discipline. And the Bible talks about God disciplines those he loves. But it was overwhelmingly not shame. There was no abandonment. And yeah, that view of Jesus is really different.
Yeah, no, it changes when you really experience God's grace through his people. You're like, oh, this isn't just, concept. Like, I see it lived out in his disciples. And so maybe if his disciples are this gracious, this loving, the real deal is even more, right? But I want to clarify, you said that you lived in a house with 5 guys with no access to women, no access to... I'm like, that's not what happened, right? just for people who don't know, Dave lived in a house with me.
Yeah.
Just like 6 guys, a totally normal house, not a prison. There were like females were allowed to come over. He was not like shut off from the rest of the world. He just couldn't live alone anymore, which is, probably not good for most people anyways. To live alone.
So true. First of all, my experience was not that it was a prison, but it was hey, this is necessary. These are necessary boundaries for you, which is true. And also I think my approach was, I'm not allowing myself to think about this as a opportunity for freedom, but I was more specific in pursuing, or, hey, I'm not texting girls. I'm not on dating apps. I'm not allowing myself to be putting myself in situations where it was an unhealthy. I wasn't having people over when other people weren't at the house, things like that. But you are correct. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because to this day, I am regularly kind of unintentionally, probably intentionally, getting up on a soapbox preaching to other men in my life about why they shouldn't live alone. I mean, I'm a good friend of mine who's living with me currently is in the process of looking for other places to live. And we got into a pretty, not heated conversation, but I was like, dude, don't live alone. You don't need to live alone. And I don't think he will end up falling into deep sin, but I just found myself being like, why am I so passionate about this? It's like, oh yeah, that's why, because I know my sin and my temptation. But yeah, it was needed and healing, and it wasn't actually prison, but for the story of the need for healing, I feel like sometimes I think about it like that. So you serve college students. Mm-hmm. So you are full-time on staff working for campus ministry. It's so interesting to me that college ministry is such a robust ministry, and also college students seem to have such a heart for Jesus. Mm-hmm. When college is the first time for most students, especially in the Western world, where they have the freedom, a freedom unlike any other before, where they can go and pursue all the things that they've heard about, that they're watching online, that their parents have been stopping them from doing while they're still at home. College is the first time that they get to kind of go and explore and experiment. Mm-hmm. And yet it seems like God's doing an incredible work of revival on college campuses through college ministries to save college students. So what's your experience been with the, like, when you have the most option for the flesh and the worldly things, and yet you're seeing God work in such like crazy ways? What's that been like?
I mean, I think college ministry is some of the funnest, and most needing to be flexible ministry of all of them, perhaps. Because college students, they just grow so quickly. Like that, this is their first time being an adult. They get to make their own decisions, although less and less with this new generation, but still mostly. But I think, they get to make all these decisions, and oftentimes people are not open to God when everything's going well. Because when everything's going well, like, why do I need God? Right? If I'm getting good grades, got a beautiful girlfriend, I'm on a sports team, like, why do I need God? Even the ones who are Christians or grew up in the church and, are part of a ministry or something, or part of a Bible study, it's often, not always, I don't want to generalize and say never, but often, they're just kind of going through the motions. They're doing this because it's a habit, because they know, this is what they grew up with. They go to church every Sunday. They should go to a Bible study, which I'm not saying that's bad. It's good to stay in the habit. But when Jesus said, I've come to give them life and life to the full, I don't think life to the full, when Jesus was thinking about it, was good grades, a beautiful girlfriend, and being on a sports team, or even, a lucrative career, a beautiful wife, and 4 kids. I think a full life is something different. And I think people start to feel the emptiness of their life when things start messing with their plan, right? Their girlfriend breaks up with them, or the friend group they have falls apart, or they make a party foul and they're no longer welcome, right? They get put in the shunned section of, oh, you need help. You're different from us. We don't want you around anymore. And it's those moments when it's like, you see that, like, life is not always in your control. And honestly, most of life is not in your control. We just fool ourselves into thinking we have control. But there is somebody who is in control. And I think those are the moments when we are offered an opportunity to surrender. Now, I don't want it to be like prosperity gospel, like, and if you give your control of your life to God, then he'll get you the good grades, the beautiful girlfriend or wife, and the whatever. No, it's giving up control, knowing, like, no, my plans are no good. Like, my plans lead me to an empty life. And yeah, God's plan may not look appealing to me if I even know it, but maybe he knows better than I do about what makes a full life.
Yeah. In this generation of college students, because you keep growing up and the college students stay the same age, which has got to be an interesting paradigm just relationally, because it's like you feel like your people stay the same and then you get farther and farther away from them. When it comes to the character and person of Jesus and what we see as fundamental to what it looks like to live like Christ, and then you look at kind of the current generation of college students in ministry, what part of Jesus do you think is really missing most from kind of the current culture that you're in from a campus perspective in the church?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I think a lot of popular views of Jesus is this like very nice, gentle guy, good teachings, good teacher, right? I feel like that's always been the case, and that continues to be the case, maybe to just a greater degree, to the point where Jesus kind of just teaches us to be good middle-class Americans, to go to church on Sunday, to, buy your suburban house and raise your children and make, 90, 100K a year and whatever, live your life like that. And it's just like, wait a minute, but that is not Jesus. Like, Jesus wasn't married, had no kids. He didn't have a place to lay his head, right? Like, Jesus lived very counterculturally. And now, does that mean we have to look exactly like that? No, I don't think so. Like, I have a suburban house. I do have a wife and a kid. But we think he's just here to build good middle-class Americans, when no, like, Jesus had a lot of bold conversations. He entered into conflict with like his enemies, the Pharisees, with his disciples, like the people who were on his side, like not just the 12, but also the crowds who followed him. They would often say, yeah, he had a large crowd of disciples, and he would, like, when he preached his message on his body and blood, like, they left. All of them left, other than, it seems like, the 12. So Jesus was not just this like nice guy. He spoke difficult things. He spoke harsh things, because that's what people needed to hear sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think we can get so scared of conflict, of being bold, that we just kind of go with the flow. And when we go with the flow, we just go with whatever the culture says is right. And that is not what Jesus did. I don't even remember the question.
No, I think, the idea that we just kind of think, to be obedient to Jesus is just to kind of do good stuff and good things will happen and we'll be good people, and then that's great. One of the things that I always forget is that the people Jesus had the most issue with were the most religious people. Because that's actually what most non-believers have an issue with. And they look at the Christians and they say, because they're bad or they have done wrong, I'm not going to follow the person they follow. And if they were to read the Bible, they would see that Jesus came in and said, hey, those people that say they know me and that they're doing all the right things, no, they're not following me. So when a lot of times when believers ask me, or non-believers come to me and they say, yeah, I'm not, like, I've been hurt by the church. Like, y'all are super judgmental and hateful and a lot of other things. I'm not going to take your religion seriously. I'm not going to consider that. It's like, that's not Jesus. And so the people who have hurt you, they're not reflecting Jesus, because Jesus never hurt anyone. Jesus spoke truth that can be painful and rebuked sin. But the people Jesus had the most issue with and dealt the most harsh with are the religious leaders, are the people who said and claimed to know all the right things and be better than everybody and make everybody feel really bad. And the people he was the most gracious with were the people who were the lowest of the low, either in status or in sin. Like he loved them. He had mercy on them, right? Like the woman who's caught in adultery. Like there's probably very few people listening to this, if anyone, who have probably done worse or more than that woman who's being pulled out in that moment. And Jesus says, hey, who condemns you? She goes, no one. Well, then I won't either. Right? And that is not what most people think of when they think about the Jesus that's in the Bible. And so that's just a hard thing to remember, that like, it's as soon as I start getting confident in my religious understanding and spiritual walk and feeling good about like, oh, I'm on it and I'm crushing it and I'm doing all the things, that's where I have the tendency to step into the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. And Jesus has the most to say to those people. And so, yeah, that's really good. You mentioned one of the things that people think about in the pursuit of like, what is a good life, is the marriage piece of it. I know, you know, that for me, in my story, that's a huge desire, right? A huge goal in life. I've kind of always said, I don't really care what I do for work. I don't really care where I live. I just want to be married. I just want to have a family. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I've practically organized my life to not set up things to make that more difficult. So I'm open to living wherever, and I'm open to whatever job that I would need to have in case that whoever my future wife is needs to move or wants to live wherever. And God has done a lot of work in my life in this area, and has reminded me that marriage and love has been my idol for most of my walk, where God's not actually been my first love. The idea of marriage has been my first love, and my obedience to him is only as a way to make sure that that happens in a healthy way, and that's not right. But through a lot of reflection, I've realized that like I kind of believed, and I think I still do, like there's a part of my flesh that still believes that my life's not really going to start until I get married, where right now, this is just the kind of training grounds for real ministry and real life and real work when I get married. Because then I'll have a purpose. Then I'll have someone that I'm like, yeah, now you're the person I build this life with. And now everything, I can start building my routines and habits, and I can settle into this because now this is forever. And God has wrecked me in that really recently and shown me, hey, you're worshiping this, and that's not what's going to bring you life. And like you mentioned, Jesus wasn't married, and Jesus makes it clear that the ultimate form of love is not romantic love, right? 1 John 4:13 or something, it's greater love has no one than this, than someone who would lay down his life for his friend. And so you are relatively recently married, and you experienced a good part of your adulthood with a desire for marriage, being in singleness. Being on the other side of it, what would you now tell people who look at marriage as the ultimate goal and who think, yeah, my life isn't going to start really until I get married?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Marriage is a huge topic. I mean, romance is probably the most talked about thing in our society, like all the movies and music about romantic love. It's no wonder that we all grow up just idolizing it, right? Like this is even like drama and heartbreak. It's like, if you're not living life unless you are either in the up or the down, and you always got to have somebody you've got a crush on, and all that stuff is just like our society peddling something that connects to something in us to make money. It just comes down to money. But on the marriage thing, I think the best way that I've come to understand marriage is it is just another facet of discipleship. Like all of life is discipleship. It is growing, is following Jesus and growing to become like him. And this is just one way that God has designed our lives to aid in that endeavor to be like him. It is just like friendship is one of those things. Life in general, and the things that just happen to us, regardless, is one of those things. Raising children is one of those things. But if any of these things becomes a God in and of itself, Brandon just quoted C.S. Lewis last night.
I have that written down to mention that if you don't.
Right? It's just like when love becomes a God, love becomes a devil. It's just, like any of these things when it, like, the reason why we shouldn't worship idols, I don't, like, part of it, sure, is that like God is God. But it's not just that. It's also bad for us. Like he loves us. He doesn't want us to do things that are bad for us. There's in the Bible, it's often like, they have eyes but can't see, ears but can't hear. And so when we worship things like that, we become like them. And so we have eyes but we can't see, ears but we can't hear. Like we just don't understand the lies that are being peddled to us because we are becoming like the idols that we worship. So anyways, marriage. After that relationship that I talked about, that was terrible, got out of it, changed, had a lot of help in changing my life to throw myself into friendships, into intimacy in friendships, in brotherhood, right? In male friendships. And the next 5 years of my life are some of the best years of my life. I mean, you were part of that. Living in that house with all these guys, just having that freedom and flexibility to say yes to so many things. It really opened me up to like, oh, this is love. And if I never got married for the rest of my life, like that would be okay because I'm not lonely at all. Like I don't desire, like I'm not going to say marriage is, I don't desire deeper intimacy than this because this is already so deep. I think marriage is a different kind of intimacy, but I don't think marriage is some kind of deeper intimacy. I think marriage, the deeper intimacy comes from a deepening friendship with your wife, not because I have sex with her. Right. It's like, that's a different kind of intimacy. But friendship and the deepening of that can happen with anybody. And so, but I think all those years of living with, a house of 6 guys and learning how to be a servant, seeing examples of that from various roommates, trying to live that out myself, even just learning how to load a dishwasher and clean a bathroom and all those things, it was discipleship that also prepared me for the discipleship in marriage. And now I have to learn how to live with a girl and the different priorities that women have that men have in a home. And then now I have a child, and like, you cannot raise a child. Well, I guess you can. You cannot raise a child well and be selfish. People try.
We've all met those kids.
Yeah. But really, like, to be a good parent, like it is ultimate selflessness, because there's no reasoning with this person. There's no logicking them into seeing your side and maybe getting your way.
Yeah.
You have to serve always. And so, again, I just forget your questions. I just go on tangents.
No, that's great. That's why I want you here. For you, are there parts of scripture that you kind of point to as like, that's what I always go back to as a refresher for the truth of the gospel?
Ooh. Man, I really wish I had read that question before. Truth of the gospel.
Or just like kind of life verses for you that are like, this is what I hold on to.
I mean, this is going to sound pretentious, but I've kind of moved away from life verses.
Nice.
I think one of the big things that seminary taught me, and it wasn't like just like one lesson or one class, but over the period of, I was in seminary for 5 years, was to really give me a better brain and reading comprehension for the Bible as a whole, rather than taking like just verses or even just chapters, but like, hey, what is this entire
theme?
Book saying? What is this entire letter saying? So First Corinthians is a great one. I think it speaks a lot on like pride and maturity and love, you know, First Corinthians 13. But we use First Corinthians 13 so much in marriage that we are like, like love is patient, love is kind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he's not talking about marriage at all here. He's talking about them and the church and their friendships, their relationships with one another.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of that is just attacking their pride of like, oh, look at these spiritual gifts that we have, the tongues, the miracles, the healings, the prophecies. And he says, I can't speak to you as mature because you're not. It's like, but look at what we can do. It looks so impressive. And it's just like, oh, impressive things, impressive people may not be mature people. And I think it comes to mind now because I'm dealing with a few students like that. Just like, no, what you see and look at as impressive, what you look up to, I don't think is what you should be looking up to. These people are not going to lead your lives in a good direction. I think a lot of the celebrity culture, not just in secular society, but in the church, it's like these people we look up to, these amazing pastors or worship leaders. I'm not going to drop names, but just the other day I was like looking up a worship leader because I was talking about him with another one of my worship pastors. And I was like, oh, he's on his 4th marriage. Like he makes amazing songs, worship songs that we all sing. And I'm like, wait a minute. I need to rethink about like who I'm following. Like, not that like, oh, we can't sing his songs anymore.
Yeah.
Because I do believe God uses his people even when they are sinful and broken, just like he uses me. I'm not perfect. I do lots of bad things that I'm not going to list here. But yeah, who am I really looking up to? Is it the impressive people who sound great, who speak well, who have big churches? Or is it the people who are living these quiet lives following God closely every day?
Yeah. The idea of who are you really following is really, I think, just kind of like true for me right now, and thinking about where do I look to for wisdom and advice and direction. To quote a famous church kind of pastor, Jonathan Pokluda, JP, he was at the Porch for a while, and now he's in Waco at Harris Creek. He's one of those people that I value his teaching style and his directness. But one of the things he talks about a lot is the idea of when he says, like, a lot of times girls will come up kind of after a service and be like, hey, pastor, like, I just need some dating advice. And he goes, okay, like, tell me what's going on. And they go, well, I'm just kind of always attracted to bad guys. I'm attracted to losers. I always seem to pick the men that end up being toxic. Mm-hmm. And he goes, okay, yeah, I understand. Can I just ask you some questions? And she goes, sure. And he goes, what's your favorite song right now? Mm. And she goes, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm looking for dating advice. He goes, yeah, no, for sure, dating advice. What's your favorite song right now? Who are your favorite artists? And, she goes, Sabrina Carpenter, Drake, different people, anything Taylor Swift sings, things like that. And he goes, okay. What about like favorite shows? Any favorite shows? She goes, Pastor, I'm trying to get dating advice. Like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, no, I know for sure. Just like, what shows are you watching? She goes, I don't know, Love Island. And he goes, the reason that you are only attracted to and choosing men who are bad for you is because you are filling your mind and convincing yourself that the best type of affection and love is from men who will ultimately be selfish enough to hurt you because they won't love you well. That's why. We are all being discipled by something. Mm-hmm. And I have people tell me, oh, well, that's not like, those shows don't really like affect me. Like, oh, if that's bad for you, then like I get it. But like, yeah, I don't really deal with that. You know, I tell people like, hey, I've never seen Game of Thrones. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, it's just, I know what's in that show. And I know what my temptation and my struggle is. If I expose myself to that, it's going to be, one, wrong, but also just like create potential temptation for me. So I don't watch that. And they go, well, what about, is it okay if I watch it? Like, I don't really have that temptation. You know, I had a friend of mine who was like, yeah, I don't really struggle with like sexual temptations. Like, I'm just not, like, that's not really my thing. And I was like, okay. So she's like, well, can I, you know, is it okay if I keep listening to Drake and keep watching these TV shows or, you know, following these people online? And I was like, I mean, it's between you and Jesus ultimately. But the wisdom that I live by is, hey, if I know that I have a tendency for that, I'm going to remove it. And she was like, yeah, well, I'm not worried about that for me right now. And is subsequently continuing to pursue sexual immorality and is convinced that it's not a problem, or at least is not actively chasing it. And it's like, yeah, Drake actually is discipling you. And that might sound crazy, but like, if you don't have anything else, if you're just scrolling through TikTok and you're just watching all these funny memes about toxic relationships, you know, there's a trending video on X where it's a live reality show, and it's like the guy's watching on a screen the girl he was going on a date with sleeping with someone else. Like, this is live television, and him running across the kind of compound screaming, like, why would you do that? That is trending, and people were like laughing about it. And I was like, that's heartbreaking. Like, I don't care if it wasn't like a good relationship or they weren't in love and maybe they were just whatever. Like, that's what's trending, is active infidelity, regardless of the rules and technicalities. I don't care if you're dating or not. If you are interested in someone and they are actively in front of you pursuing someone else, that's heartbreaking and that's painful. But that content is what is pervasive on our phones daily. Mm-hmm. That's discipling us. Like, that's discipling you if that's what you listen to or what you watch. Mm-hmm. And so to kind of call back to Harris Creek, there's another sermon from them, and the speaker was talking about, and he kept saying this over and over again, and I don't think I'll ever forget it, but he says, you listen to who you belong to. Whoever you belong to, that's who you listen to, and that's who you look like. Mm-hmm. And so you can tell me that you don't listen to these celebrities as God, and you can tell me that those things don't affect you. But if you look at your choices in life and the way that you live, that's who you belong to. Mm-hmm. And unless you are sitting at the feet of Jesus every day, choosing his truth and his words over the words of culture and of music and of television, you are going to be discipled by them instead of him. And it takes active, extreme measure to break free from that. And so I apologize for the rant. That's what's going on in my life right now. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, the last person that I sat down with, she asked me, she goes, hey, has there been any like interesting themes so far throughout all the people you sat down and talked with? And I was like, oh, I don't really know. Like, I haven't really thought about that. And then as I kind of processed it more and I was editing some of these episodes, I'm like, oh, the theme is suffering. The theme of all the people I've sat down with is suffering. And I was like, and I know why. It's because I'm suffering. But yeah, it's like I'm trying to belong to Jesus because life is not going well if I don't.
Yeah.
So there's a little, yeah, that's my piece of it. Kind of as we wrap up, I'm curious, what has Jesus got you talking about most recently? Like, what is the thing that you keep coming back to in conversations with the guys you're discipling in life and church? What's most recent for you?
I mean, other than the gospel, I think most recently I've been, so we've really changed a lot of, we might be, I don't want to talk for other people. For me, I've really started changing a lot of my philosophy of ministry this year. I think for a long time I was just doing what we've always done and what has worked. And I think this is the first year that I think for a few years now, it hasn't been as effective. And I think this is the first year where I've decided, like, okay, we're going to change a lot of what we do and how we do things to reach this generation. And it was a big philosophy shift of, like, I'm not going to make you be like me. Like, I'm not going to make you, Gen Z, be millennials. I'm going to meet you where you're at. And it was this wrestling for the past couple of years of just like, am I just pandering to this new generation, this new culture? And that was why I kept doing what I was doing. It's like, no, you've got to grow up. You've got to be like this. You've got to have grit. You've got to be disciplined. Like, stop. Like, why are you talking to your parents every single day? Like, who does that? Cut that umbilical cord.
Yeah.
To now being like, okay, no, like, that's not working. And I think God meets us where we're at. So, yeah, like, why am I so resistant to changing for them? Now, there still is this tension of like, I don't want to do things so that they'll like me. Because I don't think God met us where we're at so we would like him. It's like, no, he meets us where we're at so that we can experience him and be changed by his love. So I want to make sure I'm doing this and not this. And so I think that's what I've been talking about with my students, because we've been going through so many changes. We changed our whole branding from Friday Night Fellowship to the Grove, and we changed how we, the worship songs. I was like, why mess with things that are theologically sound, that have been vetted, that that I enjoy. And then I looked up and I was like, oh, I'm the old guy now who's like trying to hold on to the hymns, except these aren't hymns. These are just like 2000 songs. She's like, no, it's okay. Like, I may not love this new music. I may not like the style. I may think they're shallow, but is that not the criticisms that the old men who loved
had
the
about
hymns
oceans?
had?
Yeah.
So, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So I'm trying to
die to be the hero.
Yeah. I'm dying to myself.
There you go.
But yeah, I think it's just wrestling with that. We want to meet people where they're at for the right reasons, like God does, not like the world does, just to get people to like you and make money.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk about your suffering thing.
Yeah.
Because we don't like to suffer. But we say, we rarely grow when we're comfortable. That's one of our axioms. And yeah, like, those are the times when we run closest to God. It's like my son William. It's like, yeah, when he's happy and excited, he's clambering over things, climbing over things, and then he bonks his head, and immediately he turns around, looks at me, and cries. And he's just like, pick me up, please.
Yeah.
And it's like, those are the times when we grow deepest in relationship with our father, our mother, our parent. It's when we're suffering that we're like, no, I need to be close to you. And then it's okay to then tag up, and then it's like, all right, you're okay, go. Like, I don't think God is like, you know, keeping us in his clutches. I think we do get immense freedom to explore and to grow, but I think we do that best when we are secure in his love for us.
Yeah.
Right? We've all probably been that person or experienced the person who's just so insecure, who a big people pleaser at this and that. And yeah, it's because the love we experience from our family, from our friends, from our upbringing is imperfect. It's never full, because we're all sinners. But it's like the security that comes with, again, like, God loves me, even if I never did another good thing. So when I mess up, who is surprised? Me? God? No. I'm gonna mess up. I'm gonna bonk my head. I'm gonna bonk other kids' heads. Okay, but he still loves me. And when I turn around and I cry to him and ask him to pick me up, he will always.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think suffering is a big way of growing us, of discipling us.
Yeah, and I'll close with this, because I really want to try to make sure we read scripture every time. But just in the midst of the season, I feel like people, if they listen to more than one of these episodes, and be like, did Dave just start a podcast because his life blew up and he's like, I need to do something productive? There's probably more truth to that than I want to admit. Although this has been something I've been wanting to do for a while. Maybe I just need God to wreck my house so that I would start building it correctly. But where I've been in the last couple of days is 2 Corinthians 12. Paul's talking about how, well, I'll just read it. So to keep me from becoming conceited, this is verse 7. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, and this is what I wake up in the middle of the night probably 6 or 7 times now, and this is just what I say to myself. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I don't feel strong. I feel weak. I feel burdened and overwhelmed by life. And a lot of it is my own sin, and a lot of it is not. But the truth that not only is his grace enough for me, but that he's actually made perfect in my weakness. And I don't know if this is a focus axiom or this is just something I learned in college that I associate with focus. But it's the idea that if dependency is the goal, then weakness is the advantage. If your goal is to be dependent on Jesus, then it's actually an advantage to you to be weak, not to be strong. And I'm trying to lean into that because I feel weak, but I'm also praying daily to be made strong. And just to kind of finish, or to connect to your comment about your son and being a child, and when you get hurt, you turn back to your parents and say, help. God talks about how our faith should look like a child's faith. And children never hesitate to ask from their parents anything, even if it's selfish. I'm stealing this from a sermon I was listening to last night. But like, God wants you to bring all of your things to him, even if they're selfish. And in that, if what you're praying for is immature, if what you're asking for is selfish, as you bring it to him, in his perfect character, he will rework that in your heart to take it from what you want to what he wants. He'll do that. You're not going to be able to do that. And that's really changed my life recently, because I was like, the right message is, God, if it's your will, like, I'm just going to pray for your will, because if I were to ask for my will, I'm presuming upon you, and I shouldn't want that. So just like pray for, just like, your will be done. And it's like, no, I can pray that relationship would be reconciled. I can pray for restored healing. I can pray for resolution. I can pray for my anxiety to go away. I can pray for those things. And he might not do it in the way that I want, but I can bring it to him in confidence. And he's a good father. And so his grace is sufficient, but also his power is made perfect in my weakness. And I've been just encouraged a lot by people saying, hey, I'm really watching you suffer, watching you go through this has been encouraging to me, how you've responded. And I'm like, oh, okay, Jesus, I see what you're doing a little bit more every day. And I'm starting to see a little bit more of what it looks like to see joy in the midst of circumstances being different than what you'd want. And so, yeah, that's what God's teaching me.
That's great.
All right, man. Well, I'm so thankful for you. I'm so glad that despite desperately trying to never go to UT Dallas, my dad, in his wisdom, said, yeah, you should, because it's free, so you're going. And I was begrudgingly like willing to show up to campus ministry and to things. And it is because of your pursuit of our friendship that I'm here. And so I am so glad for you. And I'm so glad that you said yes to Jesus. So yeah, I love you.
Thanks, man. I love you too. And I mean, yeah, I think our close friendship has been impactful to me. It really taught me how to be a minister. Like I'd not gone through things like that before. I didn't know how to, I mean, I'm still learning through a ton of new things, but yeah, like you've been a great friend to me. And I mean, that's why you were in my wedding, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, until next time, I love you, buddy.
I love you too.